The shelling started yesterday in the evening. And it's still happening.
Locals have got used to the sounds of shelling and seem now to pay no attention to them, but still terrified.
We've got used to this. Yesterday, too, we walked under flying shells.
Hiding from mines and
Chewy lights
to
up.
save their lives, the locals
Yeah.
move underground. It's where they now live.
Sour cream, bruh.
And sleep. There is no connection to the outside in this basement, so we bring its residents the latest developments. But the shelling continues, but so do peace talks.
The negotiations, the so-called Minsk talks, last 8 years, but to no avail. There isn't any hope left for those talks.
You take a look
There
around this
are.
basement. It seems
Lord,
unfit
Lord.
for people to live in, but this is their new home. In the storage facility, half of the jars of food on the shelves are now empty. People have been hiding here for days.
There's water, sedatives. Shells did fall before, about 200 meters from here. After 8 years, we know when someone fires, when shells fall. We know who shoots. The Nazis are there.
The big question remains, why is this village and many others relatively far from frontline being targeted at all?
We see terrorists like methods of waging war. We shoot at their artillery, but they don't shoot back at us. But at
That
residential
sauce is so
buildings.
good.
Sometimes.
That's why he told you to hold it upright, because it's full of sauce.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Their artillery. They set the position in
I forgot about the sauce. Special sauce. Yeah, they don't give out sour cream. They have the sauce.
Continue to get hurt in the shelling, including women and children. We
Yeah.
now came to the Lugansk Republic Children's Hospital, where right now doctors are fighting for the life of a 14-year-old boy. He was brought here from the city on the very...
He gets insulted if you ask for sour cream for the pierogies.
The clinic in his home village is not equipped for the serious surgery this boy needed. It took time for an ambulance to arrive under shelling again and bring him to the region's main health center. By the time we finished editing this report, the boy was in critical condition. Lugansk Republic officials say in the last 3 weeks there have been almost 700 attacks on their territory from positions of the Ukrainian forces using heavy weapons. It took lives of at least 7 civilians, much more were injured. And as the fighting continues, these numbers might go higher. Marie RTee from the Lugansk Republic.
Russia is urging the U.S. to disclose materials about biological research programs in Ukraine amid allegations that those countries could have been collaborating to produce weaponized germs in violation of international law. Russia has said it's uncovered documents in Ukraine supporting those accusations, but the White House's spokesperson Jen Psaki has denied the claims and says Russia could use them as a pretext for deploying chemical weapons themselves.
We took note of Russia's false claims about alleged US biological weapons labs and chemical weapons development in Ukraine. We've also seen Chinese officials echo these conspiracy theories. This is all an obvious ploy by Russia to try to justify its further premeditated
Jen.
and unjustified attack on Ukraine.
Meanwhile, U.S. Undersecretary of State
Psaki.
has admitted there are research facilities there when asked whether Kiev is in possession of biological weapons.
Does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Ukraine has biological research facilities. We are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
So a U.S. official as senior as Deputy Secretary of State is saying that some kind of facilities do exist, and the Russian Ministry of Defense says that there were biological labs that are either U.S. run or U.S. funded. And according to the Russian military, according to the documents that they have obtained as a result of that Russian military offensive in Ukraine, scientists there worked on some extremely dangerous pathogens. These are very dangerous substances. We're talking about diseases such as cholera, plague, or anthrax, The list is actually much longer than that. Apparently, as the Russian Ministry of Defense claims, the staff there at the laboratories received orders from officials in Ukraine to destroy either these pathogens or evidence of possible work on the development of biological weapons. And again, the Russian Ministry of Defense has shown documents in Ukrainian about these orders. RTee cannot independently verify them. What is now really a cause for concern here in Russia is that they may have been destroyed or may have not. And if not, the question is, could they end up in the hands of the radical nationalist groups that are currently still very active in Ukraine? But what is very crucial for the Russian Foreign Ministry to find out is the actual role of the U.S. in this.
The U.S. Department of Defense and Administration must, as soon as possible, familiarize the international community with the programs conducted in Ukraine and do that officially. We believe that the materials existing now and the confirmations coming from both Ukraine and the U.S. do not give Washington a chance to stay silent.
But Russia is not alone in this particular case, because the eyebrows are also being raised in China about all this. We remember how Beijing was accused of running some biolabs. Well, now Beijing wants answers from Washington on this particular story.
We call on all parties concerned to ensure the safety of those labs. As the party with the best knowledge of those labs, the U.S. should release relevant details as soon as possible, including what kind of viruses are stored and what kind of research has been carried out.
I do have to point out that Kiev has denied running any kind of program for developing biological weapons. But with this latest comment from Victoria Nuland, again, who is the Deputy Secretary of State, now there will be plenty of more questions asked, because she said it out loud. There are some kind of facilities there, and what's going on with them right now is not clear.
Russian military officials say they are continuing to analyze the documents. Retired Colonel Victor Litkovkin, who is now a military columnist for the
I thought you were warming up
says
the
the information revealed so far is disturbing.
I don't think it means this area.
The creation of biological laboratories in other countries is a blatant violation of the Biological Weapons Convention. The documents for these laboratories, which the Russian army obtained, and what it found in the laboratories themselves, shows that the worst kind of pathogens were being developed there, such as plague, malaria, splenic fever, and other diseases that can become pandemics, not only in Ukraine or Russia, but also in neighboring countries. It's prohibited to create such laboratories on U.S. soil, and Americans strictly follow that law. It's also understandable that leaks of poisonous and biological pathogens could come from such labs. That's why they feared creating them on U.S. soil. But when it comes to Ukraine, Kazakhstan, or Georgia, what's the problem?
Meanwhile, Russia claims that Ukrainian forces have brought ammonia to the Kharkov region in order to accuse Russian forces of allegedly using chemical weapons, but Lugansk officials say Ukraine placed explosives at ammonia warehouses to blame Lugansk in a provocation. A number of Russian conscripts have been captured by Ukrainian nationalists. It came to light after the Russian Defense Ministry admitted some were involved in Russia's operation in Ukraine. That is despite the authorities earlier claiming that only professional military personnel have been deployed. President Putin is now seeking punishment for officials who dispatched the conscripts in defiance of his instructions.
The Chamber of Commerce from Armstrong, Lake Country, Beachland, Penticton, Summerland, and West Kelowna State. BC's mandates seem to have no end in sight. Those 6 chambers are urging the end of mandates.
Operating in Homefront has been attacked by a group of nationalists. A number of servicemen, including conscripts, were captured. Currently, we are taking all necessary steps to release them and avert the engagement of conscripts in combat zones.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says his country will continue fighting Russian troops until Kiev regains full control over its territory. In an address, he also called for Western partners to secure a no responsible for a humanitarian catastrophe if they don't. Zelensky also says he is ready for another round of talks with Russia. While Western media outlets focus on the ongoing war in Ukraine, their rhetoric is much different from what it was during previous conflicts that their countries were involved in. RT's Konstantin Rostov has compared the narratives.
A tank inside Vladimir Putin's hat. That's the image The Economist chose for its cover story on the Russian military campaign in Ukraine. And this is what the same magazine had on its front page back when the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003. A nice picture of George W. Bush and the title, Now the Waging Peace. You know the difference, as they say. When you hear American mainstream media talk about the ongoing war in Ukraine, don't forget to check what the very same outlets used to tell the whole world when it was their country conducting military operations. In 1999, the US and NATO launched a bombing campaign of Yugoslavia, also in Europe, which saw thousands of casualties and millions of people displaced. Time magazine said the attack, quote-unquote, opens the door to peace. Well, what followed didn't look peaceful at all.
At stake is our entire policy in Europe since the end of World War II to promote stability and democracy. NATO's credibility is on the line. I was suggesting we bomb Belgrade and blow up all of the bridges on the Dina. I was suggesting we take out his oil supplies. I was suggesting very specific action.
Western media definitely has a knack for justifying wars. In 2001, during the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, The Economist came up with this cover, a heart-rending but necessary war. And that's it. No calls for sanctions, for businesses to shut down, no condemnations, just a pat on the back for the American military with little concern for the potential humanitarian catastrophe that would follow the invasion. Western corporate media seem to be very concerned about the plight of common people in Ukraine now, which is completely understandable. Yet when the U.S. invaded foreign nations, the same talking heads pushed a different narrative where regular Afghanis or Iraqis effectively had to be thankful and to consider themselves the lucky ones for being liberated.
This is all about one evil dictator who possesses brutal weapons with which he will threaten and hurt a lot of people, including a lot of Americans, unless we take them away from him.
I've been asking this question over and over. Why would we intervene in Libya? The most consistent one is because it'd be the right thing to do. Because people are dying for altruistic reasons.
Oh, and don't forget, it's Russia that is seen as waging a brutal war and oppressing people. When it comes to the American military, there's always room for admiration and glorification.
We see these beautiful pictures at night, and I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons.
I think Donald Trump became President of the United States. He talked about international norms, international rules, about America's role in enforcing justice in the world.
Now the very same media that basically helped to justify multiple wars across the world are preaching about what's going on in Ukraine. And if this conflict between Moscow and Kyiv has exposed anything, it's that there is no limit to the level of double standards and hypocrisy anymore.
The UK may lift its current ban on drilling for shale gas as part of plans to boost the country's energy security. This comes after the British government decided to phase out imports of Russian oil by the end of the year. Now, the UK's energy security plan includes steps to increase its output of oil and gas in order to reduce dependency on Russian fossil fuels. This includes plans to launch 6 North Sea oil and gas projects, but the push faces opposition as it goes against the UK's plan to be carbon net zero by 2050. We discussed the issue with political commentator Anthony Weber, who thinks the policy will devastate green ideals.
The policies the government have come out with now are going to be very destructive of the green agenda because
looking for a high quality
human being was funding a better green agenda for the whole of the UK. So we're going to be in an unstable position, and the green agenda will be put back. And it's very, very sad because the Green Party in the UK have not seen that at all. They've supported this attacking of Russia without looking at what is in the interests of the UK and the UK citizens. What is needed is a sense of realism, and if the politicians in the UK and elsewhere don't wake up and change their policies, then their citizens are going to suffer enormously. And in fact, one former MP, who's an MP for Rutland, did actually mention that these sanctions would work against the UK, that the UK would suffer far more. And it will suffer in many, many ways because the financial reputation will suffer, as well as the economic reputation.
Or,
excuse me, and foreigners who are trapped in the country are attempting to
fry them in the sauce.
That is proving to be especially difficult for non-Ukrainian citizens. Black and other ethnic minority evacuees say that they are experiencing racism while waiting to cross the border into Poland. One Nigerian medical student says border guards are prioritizing white people through the checkpoints in Lvov, allowing busloads of Ukrainians through, while making other ethnic refugees travel by foot. We spoke with a leading figure of a movement that works to unite indigenous and diaspora groups of African origin. He shared his views on the alleged racism
pierogies for
broader Russian-Ukrainian.
5.
NATO should not have extended its influence to territories so close to Russia. President Putin and Russia have been subjected to aggression. They are not aggressors. The aggressors are the Western oligarchy, NATO and the European Union. The Ukrainian people are the tragic collateral damage, and it hurts me when I see it and when I think about it. It hurts me even more when I see how the Africans living in Ukraine are being discriminated against by the Ukrainians. First, I think the conflict could have been avoided if the major agreements had been respected. And second, as is also very important to say, if the Ukrainian authorities had not been used as a tool in the wrong hands. Although I deplore this war because no one can ever be happy about a war, I think that President Putin's reaction has been predictable, given all the threats the West faces. The West had wanted to turn Ukraine into its tool. It supplied it with weapons for several years and moreover guaranteed protection to the Ukrainian authorities. But here again we see the deception, the hypocrisy of this political demon. To some extent, this Western oligarchy, which promises to help its allies, but only when the situation is red hot. These people are always trying to act through a proxy. This is what they did in Syria by supporting terrorist forces. This is how they acted in Libya, also supporting terrorist forces. Zelensky, a toy of the Western elite, understands that he has many friends, but his friends are very far away. In any case, I hope that the Western oligarchy will understand that its attitude towards Russia and these proud peoples in general needs a profound shift.
Gasoline prices in the U.S. may be skyrocketing, but a CNN reporter claims Americans will be okay to pay even more as long as it's to teach Russia a lesson. But not everybody agrees.
People we've spoken to over the last couple of weeks, they're okay paying higher prices if it means holding Russia accountable for what they are doing in Ukraine.
No, we're not. Who did you even ask?
Feels like it's hurting us more than the Russians. It's amazing how these people think they speak for everyone in the U.S.
I wasn't asked.
The average gasoline price in the U.S. has surged to $4.10 a gallon, nearing the record high set in 2008. That's nearly a 20% increase from just a month ago. California has the country's most expensive gasoline, with prices reaching $5.40 a gallon. Meanwhile, Joe Biden insists that nothing can't be done with the skyrocketing prices, as the country should seek to punish Russia. But many Americans don't seem to agree with their president.
For the big oil producer that affects the prices throughout the world. But of course, I mean, it shouldn't be going up this much as it is. There should be a little increase, but not drastic increase. The things have gone up in the last week. It's gone up by nearly 60, 70 cents, and it affects me because it's like now $20 more per week.
I think that President Biden is wrong for blaming it on Russia. The reason why we have to pay more for gas.
Gas prices are skyrocketing. I've heard they might be an all-time record-breaking high, and I feel like that's the lack of awareness, preemptiveness on President Biden. I think he should have opened up the gas lines and not made us so dependent on imported oil.
33 and a half minutes, that's when I will be back with another look at your news and a wrap-up of the war in Ukraine. Stay with us. This is RTee International.
Glasses. Borski.
When all truths seem wrong, when all rules just don't hold, and a new world is yet to shape out, disdain becomes the etiquette, and engagement equals betrayal. When so many find themselves worlds apart, we choose to look for common ground.
There. Chewy says, man.
They got faces up top.
Borscht is better than goulash.
I'm Afshan Times. You're watching Going Underground as the US House Committee holds a hearing on so-called big oil to determine whether the country's largest companies are meeting climate commitments. This after the IMF warns of serious global economic consequences following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and as several nations try to isolate Russia from the world economy with Russian oil exports under fire. Well, joining me now from Chicago is economist and political scientist Professor James Robinson of Global Conflict Studies at the University of Chicago's Harris School.
I watched this earlier.
Thank you so much, Professor Robinson, for coming back on. So away.
Is that appropriate finesse? It's time for our regular feature, the Mark Stein Show bottom story of the day, and the isolation of Russia continues. As you know, Pornhub and OnlyFans have pulled out of Russia, and a Russian soprano has been fired from the Metropolitan Opera for failing to denounce Putin with sufficient gusto.
Whoa.
And as if all that's not bad enough, now Quebec's national dish is off the menu because it happens to share a name with a certain Kremlin strongman. Have you ever had poutine? Poutine? It's a tasty, nutritious blend of chips, cheese curds, and gravy. Let's take a look at it. Poutine. Oh, yeah, look at that. Chips, cheese curds, and gravy. You eat that 3 times a day, you'll live to 112, I guarantee it. I could pass out in that gravy. It's supposedly called poutine from the French pronunciation of the English word pudding. Pudding, pudding. You want some pudding? And it was invented by the chef at Le Roi Giuseppe, a casse-croûte in Drummondville, Quebec. Poutine dates all the way back to the 1950s. Unfortunately, Vladimir Putin also dates back all the way to the 1950s. And in French, his surname is spelled the exact same way as the Quebec delicacy, Poutine, even though poutine the dish and poutine the murderous dictator have nothing in common. Just to be clear, this is the beloved mush of chips, cheese curds and gravy. Look at that. And this is the ruthless mass killer. Yeah, look at that ruthless mass killer there. But unfortunately, because they're spelled the same way, the mob is finding it hard to keep them straight. The French restaurateurs, La Maison de la Poutine, the House of Poutine, which has branches in Paris and Toulouse, is now getting death threats because people think it's Putin's house. Presumably to make up for what he's lost in Western sanctions, he's bought a couple of chip fryers and hired a short order cook in Toulouse. Anyway, the inventors, Le Roi Giuseppe in Drummondville, have now thrown in the towel and changed the name on the menu from poutine
The original
to
guy.
cheese gravy.
The original guy.
By coincidence, now that Her Britannic Majesty's government is trying to freeze his bank deposits, Putin has changed the name on his Cayman Islands account to Mr. Lefroy's Cheese Gravy. Alexander Marshall, who was on this show last week, had a great line about why Canada, Australia and New Zealand have decided to compete for gold in the authoritarian Olympics. The Westminster system of government isn't exciting or romantic, and perhaps for those very reasons it's avoided all the horrors of the last century, such as fascism and communism, but these last 2 years have not reflected well upon it. And in Alexander's phrase, the authoritarian Olympics culminated in Justin Trudeau seizing emergency powers and freezing the bank accounts of thousands of Canadians for the crime of giving $20 to those Ottawa truckers, and making the leadership of the convoy political prisoners for the crime of, quote, counselling mischief. Maxime Bernier is the former foreign minister of Canada and leader of the People's Party, Le Parti Populaire du Canada, and he joins me now, and we're always glad to see him. Maxime, I suppose it's good news. But the leader of the trucker convoy, who was being held without bail, is now at last out of jail, although under very restricted conditions.
Yes, you're right, Mark. It's a good news. After more than 16 days, she was in jail for 16 days for a non-crime, like you said, because she, Tamara Lynch, was the leader of that trucker freedom convoy. And what did she do? Absolutely nothing, raising money for these truckers, and these truckers were parked illegally in front of the Parliament in Ottawa, and because of that, Justin Trudeau used the Emergencies Act and was able to freeze the accounts of these leaders of that protest, and that was happening in Canada. Usually, Mark, when a government is freezing account, they're doing that to terrorists, and they're doing that with a court order. They did that without a court order, and these leaders and some Canadians are ordinary Canadians that just want to regain their freedoms, and that's why they were participating in that protest. So it's a little bit scary in Canada right now when you know that your government can use funds or your asset in our democratic country that is not so democratic right now. And I believe that the fact of using that and freezing account is the new weapon of the Canadian government against his political opponents.
Well, as you said, these are powers that were supposed to be used on terrorists, but basically governments have treated their own, and particularly in the Commonwealth, particularly Canada, particularly Australia and New Zealand, have treated their own citizens as if we're all members of ISIS or Al Qaeda, and it's and they're not. They show no signs of wanting to give up these powers. You had an interesting thread on Twitter about the move to a so-called cashless society, which is now gathering steam, in which you seem to imply that basically everybody wants to move to a cashless society because it will make it easier for the government to track every single thing we do. And in these COVID years, I remember going into a little convenience store, and I was just buying whatever it was, a cup of coffee and a Mars bar. And the lady behind the cash register said, "Oh no, we don't take cash anymore because it's a public health risk. You might have COVID germs all over it." So COVID seems to have assisted in moving us towards a digital currency, trackable transactions for every penny you spend, basically.
Absolutely, I think it's in the agenda of the World Economic Forum, and they want to push that that kind of money, a world without cash, and we are against that. Our political body is for individual freedom and personal responsibility, and less government intervention in our day-to-day life. That will be a tool that central banks can use, and that can be something that can become like a social credit in China. We are not there, but that's a direction that if we have that kind of money, it can go there, and we want to stop that right now. Use their accounts, have money, cash money, and so that's scary. I don't want to live in a society where the government will know everything about you. When they are able to know what you're doing with your cash, the government is able to know what you prefer, what you're doing, where you're spending your money, and it's too much information for a government. Somebody told me, I don't remember who, but when the government knows everything about you, that's a tyranny. And when you know everything about the government, that's democracy. And we are crossing that line right now in Canada and in other countries, and that's scary.
Yeah, no, that's a very good way of putting it. Canada is an unusual case because if you look at Boris Johnson, he's backing off. He's backed off, at least in England and Northern Ireland, some of these things. If you look at Monsieur Macron, he basically has thrown out all the emergency measures. But we saw Justin Trudeau land at RAF Northolt yesterday. He's at the top of the airplane steps and he's wearing a black mask in the middle of the open air in case he should accidentally give COVID to a passing sparrow or any other creature flying by. He's wearing that thing, stupid mask, on the top of the airplane steps. Then 20 minutes later, he's in Windsor Castle with the Queen, and he's nose to nose with her nonagenarian Majesty, and clasping her with both hands, the super infectious double handshake. It's almost as if COVID is just a joke to these guys, as if it's all just pointless theatre to them.
Oh my God, you're absolutely right. What he did in Europe and in UK this week and yesterday, I'm not proud of that Prime Minister. It's a joke. It's a joke. Trudeau said when he became Prime Minister of Canada, Canada is back on the international scene and we will be back for the good. But we are back and, we are not back for the good. What Trudeau is doing is, first of all, is not respecting our rights, and the COVID hysteria in Canada is all alive under Justin Trudeau. But I must say that in the majority of the provinces in our country, all the COVID measures are not enforced anymore. But in Canada, you cannot travel across the country if you don't have your 2 jabs, if you don't have your vaccine passport. you cannot leave the country if you don't have your vaccine passport. And if you're a federal civil servant, you cannot work for the government if you don't have your vaccine passport. So that must end. But for Justin Trudeau, I believe he enjoyed these authoritarian powers that he had during COVID-19, and now they're switching that to the war against Russia. And, you know, we are paying the cost with inflation and the loss of our purchasing power. It's not going well in Canada, economically and politically. And that's why I believe that our party is growing, because we are there to fight for Canadians and to put our country first, not the UN and not the World Economic Forum.
Well, since you brought up the Russian thing, he was over here supposedly for the Russia-Ukraine situation, and he stood there at the podium in Downing Street with Mr. Johnson and Meneer Rutte from the Netherlands, 3 prime ministers. 2 of them are unmasked. They look like normal human beings. Trudeau's there in his mask. I don't know what that's meant. I don't know what that's meant to project. He wore his mask inside 10 Downing Street. The other 2 guys didn't. What do you think? What do you think the situation in Russia is and in Ukraine is headed to, Maxine? Because there seems to be a weird urge to escalate it, almost as if they're sort of eager to expand it into a 3rd World War. And you think to yourself, they can't be that nutty, but they keep talking the thing up as if they want to make it bigger.
Yes, you have a point there, Mark. And, you know, our party is not pro-Russia. We condemn what Putin did, and we believe that Ukraine is a sovereign country, and we must respect Ukraine and the full territoriality of Ukraine, for sure. But that being said, we must know that Putin, for the last 14 years, said to us in a Western country that we must not have Ukraine part of
No, I know. How did she do that?
Did she eat your candy?
No, but she just knocked it with her tail and knocked the cookie out of the package somehow.
Wait, that faster?
That was a good point for Kennedy at that time. But Putin said the same thing, and we were not listening to it. And now we have that war. It's a disaster, a human disaster. And so I believe that, and I hope that we'll have negotiation, and that conflict must end. But I'm scared. I'm looking at it's always like the West wants to put more, and you know, it's scary because, as you know, I don't want that to be another world war. And you know, the line is very, very there. NATO must not participate in that war, and with the no zone flight, it can be something that Putin will say, you know, you are part of that, and now you are our enemies. So I hope that diplomacy will win. You know, we are for peace and prosperity.
That's true, and those 2 things go together, as we're about to learn, because we've got all these sanctions now. And the net result of that is the cost of living is going to be going up for people in Canada, the UK, Europe, the United States, all over the place. Thank you very much, Maxine. It's always great to have your clarity on these issues. Stumperstein's coming up. gbnews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at gbnews. Plus, America needs Russian oil, Europe needs Russian gas. So Putin may be the new Hitler, but he's also our home heating supplier. How does that contradiction resolve itself? Stick around.
Somewhere out there is a what-to-wear dilemma. Couple of adjustments. I don't even think about it. Somewhere out there is a colleague and a mate, an extra shift, a payday treat, a Saturday off. You could find all this in a job that you never knew was out there. Search Job Help to discover support, training and advice on finding your next opportunity.
Are you a director in the construction industry? Has COVID changed how you keep stakeholders informed of the progress of your development? In One Place is your very own tailor-made community engagement app. Designed by Virtual Viewing, the app lets you tell people the latest news and updates, give access to 3D maps and plans, warn locals of possible disruption, list recruitment opportunities. Discover more at virtualviewing.com.
Here at Gold Reserve Jewellers, we buy and sell gold and silver jewellery. We believe it's best to sell your jewellery face to face, so we can answer any questions you might have about the items you sell. Our friendly and expert staff can help make that process really easy. Our customers are often amazed at the price they receive for bits of old and broken jewellery, and it's always a pleasure to hear about their plans for spending all that extra cash. So call down to Gold Reserve Jewellers for a fast and friendly quote. If you need to buy, sell, or repair jewellery, visit goldreserve.co.uk.
Where's Wizard?
Oh, you got a new TV?
Yeah, it's the new TV from Sky.
With Sky and Netflix built in.
Look at £39 a month. No dish, no box. It works over Wi-Fi.
Extraordinary.
Like magic. Get Sky Entertainment, Netflix, and Sky Glass TV from £39 a month.
Oil has been going up for the last year or so, basically since Joe Biden entered the Oval Office. It was $50 a barrel then, and it took a year to double in price and hit $100 a barrel just over a week ago. And then in the last 8 days, it has rocketed up. Brent crude is now up over $130 a barrel. At $130 and climbing, Vladimir Putin can afford to invade pretty much anywhere he wants to. They're talking now about $200 a barrel. Russia is the biggest supplier of imported oil to the United States. Well, that's oil, and that's America. For gas and Europe, the situation is even more stark. In fact, Putin could easily drive a wedge between the two halves of the Western alliance by keeping the oil flowing to one half but turning off the gas to the other. Analytics and independent commodity intelligence services. And he joins us now. Basically, Tom, what happened? I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment about nuclear war and all the rest of it. Nuclear Armageddon is a pretty terrible thing. Big mushroom cloud outside the window. Nobody likes to think of that. But actually, Putin just turning off the gas instantly could be very devastating for much of the continent.
It could. I mean, I think we're in a situation where Europe receives maybe 30-40% of its gas from Russia. So suddenly turning off those taps, it would have a seismic impact on the price of gas throughout the continent. Now, bear in mind that gas currently, the GB, the British NBP price, the price of wholesale gas in Britain, today closed around £5 per therm. Yesterday, it had an all-time high of £8 a therm. This is a market that typically is 40p a therm. So in the last 6-9 months, we've seen this price rise across in Britain and across the continent as the markets become tighter, and then the events of the last 3 weeks have really caused that price to shoot up even more. So if we lost supply from Russia, the price would go even higher and it would have a big impact.
Yeah, it's quite odd because we've got this wartime measures with everything but gas, as it were. So in other words, major, IKEA has pulled out of Russia, for example, closed its stores there. But at the same time, everybody's expecting him to keep sending the gas to Western Europe's way. If that doesn't happen, who does he sell that gas to? Does he sell it to the Chinese?
No, he doesn't have options. This is the point. So the entire of the Western Siberian gas infrastructure is designed to feed Europe and Turkey, and so if he's not selling to those markets, he has no other customer base. There is a pipeline that connects Russia to China, but it's not connected to that huge Western Siberian grid, so that's not really an option. And Russia has some optionality in liquefied natural gas, gas on tankers that float around the world. But again, these facilities are already running at maximum capacity in Sakhalin, that's in the far east of Russia, and Yamal, which is in the Siberian north. But they're running at max capacity, so any unused production, if the pipe stopped heading to Europe, certainly can't go anywhere.
And what happens then, just to look at it from the other way, if he hasn't got anybody else to get the gas to, he might have customers, but he doesn't have the grid to deliver it to them. What happens to his European customers? I mean, what does Germany do if suddenly there's no Russian gas?
Well, this is precisely the problem, really, and a situation
Turn that light off to put those pierogies in there.
Watch out.
Politically, it really wants to make
When did it up?
Stop,
shit.
There is no, the Norwegian gas infrastructure is running at maximum capacity. Algerian pipeline capacity is at max. And again, that global LNG.
Posturing.
All of the liquefaction terminals, be they in the US or Qatar, Australia, they're also
Inago, mama.
So
Inago.
really spare molecules around, apart from Russia.
Mama.
They don't want to sell it to
Can
Europe.
you close the blinds, please?
It's really quite a difficult situation, which is of course what is causing that price.
Oh, my phone. There was a commenter on Michelle Dewberry's program a couple of hours ago who said
Shocked
we
your
should
ear hole.
wear an extra jumper in the cause of taking down Putin. I mean, is that basically the only option? If they are, and for other continentals, they basically are wearing an extra sweater while they're sitting around the house. But there isn't, they are going to actually have to get rid of it.
Well, I think there's two things there.
No, not tempting.
It's not a case of Germany or the UK. The British grid is entirely connected with the